Hello, good evening, everyone, and welcome to Black in the Berg Live. My name is Leslie King, and I am the founder of Black in the Berg and Black in the Berg Live, and I am your host on this Friday evening. I'm so glad you could join us. I'm excited about our conversation. I'm going to ask you to like and share this video with your friends. We are live streaming from YouTube. We're streaming from Twitch and Facebook. So wherever you are, please feel free to join us and tell your friends. And let's go ahead and get started. So today, our conversation topic is languages of invisibility. And I'm excited about our guest. Our guest is Veronica Jackson, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce her. So Veronica is a designer and visual artist, and she is from Central Virginia and currently in California, right?
That's right.
Yeah, so I'm happy you're with us, and I'm looking forward to our conversation. So how's the weather out in California?
Right now, it is very sunny, and it's been, it's January in California. Not all of California is LA, right? So not all of California is hot and sunny all the time. So here in Sacramento, where I am in the center, basically, of the state, right now it's sunny, but it has been really foggy in the morning, and we had some rain last week, and it got cold to like high 30s. But I heard you guys got massive amount of snow, so I'm glad
we there. Yeah, we did have some snow here, so it's gone. And today, and I think yesterday, the weather was very pleasant. But we're supposed to have snow again this weekend. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and get right into it, Veronica.
Okay.
Why don't you start off and tell us a little bit about you as an artist and your journey as a visual artist for those who may not know.
Sure. So my journey has been an interesting one. Like I've always been an artist, but I didn't know it. So there's that whole piece of like understanding who you are, and when you come to your kind of like maturity and figure out what you want to be. As a child of the late 60s, early 70s, being an artist was not an option for me. It's not something that I saw. It was not something that was nurtured in my being. At that time, as a Black girl, when you look at visual artists back then were white men. It wasn't Black women. So I didn't see a role model. I didn't see myself as an artist. And it wasn't until basically 3 years ago that I finally gave myself the permission to tell my story, to be the artist that visualizes what I feel as a Black woman, the plight of my Black experience. And that is what my artwork is about. It's autobiographical, and it is specifically geared towards speaking my truth. So Leslie, you there?
I'm there. So
Okay.
what's interesting about that is, in talking and doing the show, we've talked to other artists and they have similar experiences. I wonder also about your formative years, what kind of inspired you, in terms of art? And did you have teachers? Was it, your parents, or what kind of inspired you to take that as a path?
Well, as I said, it's like before, art was not even on my radar, right? I didn't even think that I could do it because there were certain skills that artists had to have, or certain education that I didn't have at that time. So it wasn't until I went to graduate school, and I graduated from California College of the Arts in 2016. So I went to graduate school late in life. And even at that point, upon graduation, I didn't even think about visual art or being a visual artist. I have a 30-year career in museum exhibit design. So just to back up, I graduated from architecture school from UVA in the mid 80s. worked as an architect and exhibit designer for the past 30 years, got to a point in my career where I was like, you know, I just need to be a better contributor to humanity. What am I doing? You know, because the older you get, and if you're conscious, you start to decide, it's like, what have I done for this planet? You know, what have I done for this society? And it gets to a point, and it's gotten to a point where I decided that I wanted to give back. I wanted to give more. I wanted to make a better contribution. So at that point in my career, when I was a museum exhibit designer, I had a design firm, I had big projects. I just had this kind of mid-career crossroads. It was a crisis, but I turned it into a crossroads. And that crossroads was, okay, I want to teach, I want to give back. And so as a result, decided if I wanted to teach, I needed to have a master's degree. Went to grad school and got the master's degree. And then when I came out, really, I went to an artist residency. So for anyone out there who doesn't understand the value of artist residencies, they are valuable. And please contribute to them if you can. VCCA is in Lynchburg's backyard. It's in Amherst. I've been there, helpful to my career. So please contribute to artist residencies whenever you can. But I went to an artist residency in Santa Fe Art Institute. And while I was there, it gave me the time to think, to allow this art to literally come out of my being. And as a result of that stay, I made a piece of art because there was an exhibit. So there was an opportunity. And so instead of, once again, passing on that opportunity or thinking that I was not worthy, that my story wasn't important enough to tell, I went for it. And I made this piece of art and I got recognition for it. So I see that one of the questions in the chat is like, who's your favorite artist? That's a hard question to answer because there's so many great people out there. But going back to your question, Leslie, about who inspired me, I think some of the artists that inspire me now are like Carol Walker, obviously, because she is talking about the Black experience with her silhouettes of enslaved life. Glenn Ligon is a major, major influence for me because he works in text, and a lot of my work is text-based. And then there are people like Jenny Holzer and Barbara Kruger. They also work in text. And then there's an artist named Iona Rosiel Brown, who's based in DC, who is an amazing artist that talks about her story. So she uses the medium of art to like exorcise her demons out of her being. And this is what I love. And I was jealous about artists is like they get to work out all those things through their medium. And I finally said, okay, Veronica, I'm giving myself the permission to be one of those people.
So those artists, and I'm familiar with some of them, you were introduced to them in your adult life. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now, you know, one of the things you talk about is your evolution from designer to visual artist, right? And I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit about, I guess, two things, that evolution, but also some of the projects that you have been involved with as a designer, and then we can talk more about, you know, your visual art as well.
Sure. One of the major projects that I worked on as a designer was for the African Voices project at the Smithsonian's Museum of Natural History. And I worked on that project, I think, in the late 90s. And that was a formative project for me because I was working with a series of anthropologists, curators, Africanists, who all happened to be, 90% of those people were white, right? They're studying the African continent. And from that group of people and this project, I learned about my African heritage. And I say that it changed my life because it taught me to be proud of who I came from, as opposed to the education that I was taught in America, a person of African descent. So I learned that I came from great people. I learned that I came from a continent full of riches of not only material wealth, but also culturally. And I started thinking differently about myself. I had an agency, I had a self-worth, I had a sense of self-esteem that was heightened because I learned about the history of who I came from in a way that was different from how I was taught in public education in this country. So that project, it was transformative and formative for me, but also I acknowledge, and so does the client acknowledge to this day how what I contributed to the project. There was a theme that they a certain way of thinking that they had about the project, and when I came on board, I suggested a different way of thinking that allowed the project to blossom, to kind of blossom, but also be very cohesive, and it made more sense than the original thinking of it. And it's a 20-year-old project. It had its 20th anniversary last year, the year before. So, and it still is relevant. It still looks good, and the client is still happy with the project. So, that was one of my major projects, African Voices. And it's funny, I gave a lecture to a class at Sweetbriar around, I think it was October of last year, and the art professor, knew about the project, and I didn't even know that. So it's interesting how projects that I've worked on that are like 20 years ago, 15 years ago, people have seen and they're relevant. And a lot of times they don't even know who the designer is. So in some ways, that's part of that invisibility, not getting recognition for the work that I've done. In my slide presentation, I talk about how I have designed cases for the Emancipation Proclamation. That was a big project that I worked on called Discovering the Civil War, which was at the National Archives, which was a traveling show. So that was one of the last projects I did in my design firm that I had before I closed the firm. And I've also worked on the American Presidency, A Glorious Burden exhibit that is at American History Museum. And at that time, what the client was Lonnie Bunch, who is now the Secretary of the Smithsonian.
Wow. So, I mean, you've had a diverse, you've done a lot of different things around design and exhibits and vast knowledge and depth. What's interesting, before you started talking about your specific work, we're in Black History Month, and about how you found determination from
Sure.
connecting, that history, in your work that was
Hmm.
absent in your formative years of going through school. And so, I think that's an interesting thing. And the more that you learned about that particular history, it kind of fueled your motivation to do more and understanding of who you are. And I wonder if there are other instances of that you found in your art, in the process, that have really been inspirational for you.
Yeah, I could say that, let's see, when I am doing research, because my work is very much research based. So when I am doing research and I find about, like, okay, for instance, my thesis in graduate school, the topic of my thesis was this woman named Ada Overton Walker, who was an amazing vaudeville star that a lot of people don't know about. So once again, understudied Black women, African American women who have set the foundation for where entertainment is now. Many people don't know about this woman. She was a queen of the cakewalk, but she also was all about respectability politics. At that time, when women, and especially women in the theater was not seen as a respectful profession at that time. So we're talking about the 1900s, early 1900s, vaudeville. But she brought respectability and class to this subject matter that was in the face of, like, the race men, like George Washington Carver, Booker T. Washington, people like that. So she is saying that, okay, I am in the entertainment business. I am on Broadway. I am in vaudeville, but I am still bringing respect to this profession. So learning about her actually gave me another kind of foundational element to say that I need to focus my work on Black women. There has been so much work, discussions, realms about the Black male body, but very little on Black women and Black women's agency. So doing that project on Ada Overton Walker helped me think about, okay, foundationally, what is my art practice going to be?
Yeah, and so that leads me to, your process of unearthing or bringing to light those things that are invisible in the work, and the importance of highlighting this history, and especially with Black women, right, and
Sure.
bodies. So that, so the next question is about kind of the languages of invisibility. But before that, I see that we do have a question in the chat about your master's program and what
Mhm.
makes a program reputable. So I don't know if you want to speak to that,
That's
or if you
that's
can.
relative because I mean you can go to like the systems that exist for relating projects or not projects, but for making the standard for colleges and universities and what makes them reputable. I think when I was searching for programs, I was asking friends about programs who were in like who taught at the PhD or PhD and they taught at the college level, asking them about which programs I should go for. The other big element, you can also think about who do you want to work with? So you research the program. So the program that I went to at California College of the Arts was not an MFA program, which I'm very kind of kicking myself that I didn't go for the MFA. It's an MA, which is a Master's of Arts in Visual and Critical Studies. Now, I'm glad that I chose that program because studying visual culture, as I have said in my literature, is a transformative experience because visual culture is so important to how we see ourselves, especially as people of color. I mean, now there are many more instances of people of color in media, in popular media. But back in the day, it was very limited. And when we did show up, it was done in a very derogatory and negative way. To do a little sidebar here, Frederick Douglass loved photography when it came to the fore because he said that now the Black body can be portrayed accurately. Before, in paintings and drawings, Black people were depicted so horribly. Harper's Magazine has some of the worst images of these kind of caricatures of the Black body at that time in the early 1900s. And so when Frederick Douglass was finally photographed, and he supposedly was the most photographed man of that era, he did that because his likeness could be seen and then put out into the universe as an accurate portrayal of this man. So I'm saying that to say that visual culture is incredibly important, and then understanding the importance of it and being taught how to look at and read visual culture, I think is very important. And I think visual and critical studies is a program that we should have in like the secondary school level and not just
Yeah.
education.
Well, it's also this liberatory process of agency within visual culture and photography specifically, and other means that's also important, right? The ability to choose how you're depicted.
Sure,
When
absolutely.
in many ways there are constraints around our bodies in other places in society. And so a visual medium is certainly one way to be able to do that. So I want to, transition a little bit and talk about this languages of invisibility,
Okay.
and tell me about, how did you get here, the inspiration behind that, and I'm assuming you want me to show the
Yes.
PowerPoint.
If I can pull
Okay.
up that slide. So, and in fact, you can go to, yeah, I'll pull up my PowerPoint with you. So I can tell you which slide to, so why don't you go to slide 6? Let's start with that one.
Okay. And let me make you, hold on. Let's go to slide 6. Am I there?
Let's see, is that, go back one?
All right.
Go back another one? And one
Here
more.
we go.
There you go. Okay. So the Language of Invisibility project came about because of an incident that happened to me personally. I was in San Francisco. When I was in San Francisco, I lived in the Tenderloin, which is like an economically depressed area of the city. And why I lived there is a whole nother story. But anyway, I was there, I lived there, navigating that environment. And one day I was in Whole Foods, not too far from there. I was standing in line, in the checkout line, ready to go to the cashier. This white guy came up and went around me and went to the cashier. And he just like cut in line. And so I said to him, "Excuse me, I'm standing here. I'm in line." He's like, no, you weren't. No one was here. I literally just walked up and came to the cashier. So he literally says to me that he did not see me standing there. And that was a revelation for me because that had never kind of like happened to me on that level before. And I really came to grips with my invisibility. And it was like shocking. And so to the point where I was like in line taking a selfie of myself to prove that to myself that I existed. And so what happened was after that, I just like put that in the back of my head because at that time, I'm not an artist. I can't express this. I can't express this kind of disenfranchisement, this slight against my being. What do I do with this? But I wrote it down. I remembered it. I wrote it down and I put it away and went to continued grad school, got the degree. And then when I was at Santa Fe Art Institute, I had this idea about these Black bulletin boards that you see like in stores or in office buildings. And they are these boards that kind of like make an announcement. They're announcing when the next meeting is, or they're announcing what floor you should go to. And I was thinking, well, what if I did Black text on these blackboards? And so I decided to come up with this text of like, okay, these are my languages of invisibility. These are a verbal version of these slights against my person. And so I came up with this first board that said, "Oh, I did not see you. And it's simply because you refuse to see me," which is a paraphrase of a quote from Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man right there in the first paragraph of the book. You refuse to see me. So then I asked two friends of mine who had that same kind of element, because part of being like dismissed or having these things that happen to you as a woman, as a Black woman, you're thinking, oh, I imagine that can't really be happening. Until you talk to your friends and realize like, no, that happened to me too. Then you realize that there's that problem here and that you can own this and you don't have to belittle yourself or your thoughts about these things that have happened to you, these incidences. So I asked two friends of mine to give me their languages of invisibility. And then I came up with these 4 panels. So you can go to the next slide, Leslie, please. And so in this next slide is, this is from a friend of mine. It's like, so go back to the next slide. Right, that one. Nope, one before that. Okay, that's the one. So do you know what you're doing? Asked when you are an expert. Or can you help me with this? Asked when you are also a customer in the store. And then the next one, Leslie. Despite my many successes as a Black woman in America, this is how I am perceived. And I usually preface this one with, I've designed cases for George Washington's uniform and the Emancipation Proclamation, and I've done other things. But despite those successes, I am still seen as invisible in this world. And then the final one, Leslie. And the next one is from another friend who talks about being seen, as a Black woman. Let me see, go to that next one. As a Black woman working and living in a white world, I feel like a visible exception, but to them, I've become an invisible rule. So this whole idea that she as this brilliant scholar is the exception to that talk, to that realm, but she's also the invisible rule that they refuse to see, that rule of not seeing the Black body. So then and you can go to the next slide, Leslie. When you see these 4 panels over the expanse of the 4 pieces, can you go to the next slide? I also substituted some words out in white so that over these 4 panels, a subliminal message is read. So refuse me, help, I feel invisible. So this whole element of like, taking these languages, instead of ingesting them instead of keeping them inside me. I decided to do something with them. Like I said before, you know, I can exorcise this demon of being invisible. I can bring this thing out of my being onto a surface and bring it out to the public, because I know I'm not the only one that this has happened to. So I'm dedicating this work to anyone who has felt disenfranchised, who's felt less than. But specifically, I'm talking to Black women because I know my sisters are out there that these things have happened to.
Okay. Is there another one or?
Um, no, I mean, you can just keep this up for right now. And then as we go through.
Okay. Well, I wonder, you know, so there's kind of this paradox of being seen and unseen at the same time. So responding to something, but it's in a capacity that sees us as inferior or less than, right?
Yeah.
You know, so that the invisibility of our full humanity, of our intellectual knowledge and expertise in being, also is a part of that invisibility,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
And I wonder, so what's the reception? How has this been received? This particular display?
I mean, it's had a good reception. I mean, people have responded positively about it, and they have said thank you for doing this work. And even people, women that are white women, women who are not of color, have said, you know, I've felt that same way. So I am glad that my work speaks to a broad range of people. You know, and one of the questions you had asked me
Yeah.
before was about, like, you know, the visibility aspect of it. You know, when have I felt most seen or visible? And you can go to the next slide, actually. We can talk about
Okay.
that. And I feel that
Good.
when I have been seen is when I'm hyper visibilized. You know, so this whole, and go to the next slide, this whole idea of an exaggerated visibility that people have placed upon me. So part of this time when I lived in San Francisco and lived in the Tenderloin, I was called homeless twice. And on the third occasion was labeled a drug dealer. And it was like, really? And it's all because of my brown skin, my natural hair, and where I was in that space. So I came up with this piece called Homeless Tourist, which is the next slide, a couple of slides from, go to the next slide and the slide after that. And so I talked about, like, you know, these elements of, okay, the trappings of how I am being portrayed. So despite me wearing fly gear, expensive gear, walking around the Tenderloin, I'm still labeled homeless. Like, I could be wearing a fur coat, I could still be labeled homeless. But a white girl with a blonde ponytail and ratty workout gear would never be called homeless. She would be called a tourist. And so this is how this piece came about. So like I said, my work is very autobiographical. It's speaking to my experiences in life. The other time when I feel kind of visible is when I am called someone else, like Whoopi Goldberg. I cannot believe how many times people say that you look like Whoopi Goldberg. And that then sparked another piece in me. And if you can go several more slides through, Leslie, the Not Whoopi Project, and go to the next one. So what I did was I came up with a sign of Not Whoopi, and I have employed friends of mine who have dreadlocks that the same thing has happened to. And so if you can go to the next slide, this is an example of my friend Zoe, who is holding the Not Whoopi sign. And I'm going to ask several other friends to hold the sign and, like, put them all in alignment. It's like, women, Black women who have dreadlocks do not all look like Whoopi Goldberg. I look nothing like Zoe, but they have labeled her like a Whoopi as well. So it's just like these elements of, like, this is what I mean by hypervisual. It's like you put a visualization on my body. It's an exaggerated visibility, which is subject to this labeling.
Yeah, you don't look like Whoopi.
Thank you. You know, not that, you know, I don't know if people are trying to do that, say that as a compliment or not, but, like, whether Whoopi Goldberg was a beauty queen, it doesn't matter. I have my individuality, I have my identity, and so just don't put that identity on me, someone else's identity on me.
Yeah, so projecting that onto you. So the other question that I think I was asking about, when do you feel most visible
Mm-hmm.
beyond the hypervisibility? But when do you experience, or how have you demonstrated with your art, or have seen in other artwork, when you are fully seen for your knowledge, your skills, and expertise? So what are those experiences like? Where does that occur?
I guess it occurs sometimes when I am in meetings or conversations with people, when I am offered jobs by clients. So I guess, when people see my talent and see how I can possibly lend that talent to a situation. Yeah. Are you hearing the echo?
Okay. Nope.
Okay. It's just on my end.
Yeah, I don't hear an echo. So I wonder, is it primarily when you are in kind of white spaces that you feel this sense of invisibility? When you are with people who share your history and your own experiences, do you feel that sense of invisibility just as much?
No, no. To the latter, no, I don't, not as much. And
Okay.
as an artist, as a visual artist who before COVID, I was navigating through the world. And so, and I'm saying that to say that I was very much a lot of times navigating through white spaces. So even though I was most times the only Black person in these white spaces, I still felt invisible or hyper visible.
Mm.
So for instance, I was at the Venice Biennale in Venice, Italy, and I think it was the 2019 Venice Biennale. And I was standing there looking at a Martin Puryear, who's another fabulous, famous artist who I admire. I was looking at his installation for the American Pavilion at the Biennale. And this guy starts to take my photograph. And I was like, whoa, whoa, I don't know you. He said, I think I'm from Danish and we like you. It's like, you don't know me. Please don't take my photograph. So this is this element of like this
Mm-hmm.
hyper visible element in the sense of like, you're an object to be photographed. It's like, no, I'm not. So there's that kind of visibility that is annoying.
Right, and that I have the right to photograph you,
Exactly.
and that often getting upset when you say no,
Right.
right? The audacity to ask, certain questions, and thinking that you are entitled to either an answer or something,
Mm-hmm.
as a result of, yeah, so that's part of it too. So the other piece that we were going to talk about, and I think you alluded to this when in our initial conversation, was around, let me close this out, around visual art being transformational.
Mm-hmm.
And in what way do you see visual art as a transformational process, or how does it lend itself and influence transformation in your
Yeah.
opinion?
And actually, what I said specifically is like studying visual culture is transformative.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is the point of understanding your visual landscape and your visual environment. And so I say it's transformative by exemplifying that once you know about your visual culture, or you can see things in visual culture that can prompt you to learn more, to go deeper in something else. So I'm looking at my notes here that I took, and um, like in the right hands, it allows one to think differently about oneself as well. So for instance, with the African Voices exhibit, the way that that exhibit is designed and set up, little Black kids that go through that exhibit may have a different sense of who they are as a result of seeing their African heritage, seeing themselves in an environment that is more complementary than with some possibly some past history books. So this
Hmm.
whole idea of seeing culture differently. Another example is, and I mentioned Glenn Ligon earlier, the artist. He did a piece based on a Zora Neale Hurston quote, and it says, "I feel most colored when I am thrown against a sharp white background." So that is the quote that's in his artwork, and he repeats it over and over and over again. And if anyone knows Glenn Ligon's work, he starts very pristine at the top and as he goes down, it gets smeared and layered on black letters, and then it's illegible at the bottom. But I pull out that piece because if you read that quote, you might say, "Oh, that's a compelling quote." You don't know that it's Zora Neale Hurston. So then you do more research about who that is. You go further down the rabbit hole because then you can connect to Alice Walker, and then so on and so on and so on. So this element of like visual culture being almost like a history lesson, right? Because it's looking at how we as human beings visually have dealt with the complexities of this human condition. If any of that's
Yeah,
making
so
sense.
yeah, it does. It does make sense. And I wonder, why do you think that visual culture, and maybe it is in ways that I don't see, is valued as much as it could be in terms of connecting it to, transformational, or change, or connecting it to history. So why do you think there's a disconnect there, or do you think there is a disconnect? Um,
I think it is a
in society.
I think it is a disconnect. Or let me say this: I don't think the connection has been made. I don't think it's purposely disconnected, and maybe I'm not enough of a scholar about that to understand that. But I think that the connection is there, and people are not making it. So
Yeah. Um, I mean, I also wonder about, we live in a capitalistic society, and thinking about monetization, and, those things that you can profit off of tend to be more valued than others. And, being an artist, often artists are struggling in many ways, financially.
sure,
So I wonder if there is a tie there as well, in terms of seeing the value, because there certainly is a value. And I appreciate what you said about connecting it to that history in ways that especially younger people can connect with, for those who may not want to, are not heavy readers per se. It may be one way to inspire them to think about that in a more creative uh, avenue. So,
yeah.
yeah.
So for me, it's like the transformation also means it's the accessibility, right? So transformative is another word for access or a gateway. So I see visual culture, studying visual culture as a gateway into history, into the excuse me, the past cultures that we may not know about. So like the things that Beyonce is doing in Lemonade, that all has a foundation in African American art that came before her. Julie Dash's Daughters of the Dust,
Mm,
Pippa Reese, who's a Danish artist. Beyonce is literally taking that whole work that Pippa Reese has done and use it in her videos, right? So these things that we see in popular culture, they all have a foundation that we need to look at and understand.
yeah.
And once we do that
If
research,
we,
yeah,
yeah.
then that leads us to something else that we can also, I mean, like the whole element of Jim Crow, the character of Jim Crow is based on a Black vaudeville character.
Mm,
It's all out there for us to
yeah.
learn. And now with the internet and online accessibility, it's so much easier to get this information than when like I was growing up, going to the library, the Dewey Decimal System, all that kind of stuff. And libraries were limited. But now we have access to
Hmm.
larger libraries to find out this information.
Yeah. So there's more opportunity, and I think that we have more Black artists,
Oh, absolutely.
or at least popular, artists, and so who are doing some of the same work. And before we get into talking about this exhibit that we want to definitely talk about that you're involved with, one of the other questions was that I had for you about social justice in your practice and how you incorporate that into your art. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and that importance for you.
Yes. So if we could pull the PowerPoint back up, and I want to specifically, so go through, keep going through, just keep going through the slides, and I'll let you know when to stop. Okay, that one. Go back. That one.
Okay. Go back. All right.
Go back one.
There we go.
Okay. So when we're talking about like the social justice for me is revealing or visualizing my feminism. So visualizing my feminist practice means that I am speaking to disenfranchised people, people who have had not been acknowledged in society. And the closest example to that, the closest one to my heart, is a piece that I did called That's Pops' Money. And it is based on my grandmother's devalued labor. So part of the social justice element of my work is also just revealing the elements that are not fair, safe, sane, that people endure in their lives. So my grandmother was married to my grandfather for 67 years. She bore him 9 children, 5 boys and 4 girls. And my uncle had the nerve to say one day, or my mother was talking about mama's money, and my uncle had the nerve to say that that's not mama's money, that's Pops's money, referring to the pension that my grandmother was receiving as a result of my grandfather's death. And so basically what he's saying is like, my grandmother didn't, that's not her money. She didn't earn that money after 67 years in a marriage, literal labor of 9 children. And she worked inside the home during that time. And so if you go to the next slide, my response to that statement, those 3 words, was to create a series of time cards that represented my grandmother's labor. So I created 813 time cards. One time card is representative of 1 month of the 67 years that she was married. And I cranked these things through a Vandercook press, letterpress. And so I created a time card to be representative of her labor. And on the time card, it had things like, cooked, clean, bore children, gardened, and she was very religious. So every 7th day of the time cards, there was go to church. And if you go to the next slide, you can see, this was at Riverview's in Lynchburg. And so that's another view of the piece. And if you go to the next slide, we can see a close-up version of the time cards. And what I did was I printed them black ink on blue ink on black paper. So be very representative of her blue collar labor. And so if you can see that it's interesting, the blue and the black came out red, which is interesting. And then if you go to the next slide, it's an example of the time card you can see close up. But also another layer to the piece was that my, like I said, she had 5 boys and 4 girls. And the boys were so much more valued than the girls. So on the date of the birth of the boys, the birth date, I foil stamped their names in white on the date of their birth, because literally they were more valuable than the girls. And if you go to the next slide, the girls' names I foil stamped in black, so they were like invisible, just like my grandmother's labor. And an example of the valuation of the girls or the boys. All 5 of my uncles came home from the hospital with 3 names. 2 of my aunts came home with the names Baby Girl Jefferson. They didn't even get names until like a year after their birth. Mm-hmm. So it's just like these layers of this like devaluation that had gone unspoken for so many years.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I was
Mm-hmm.
brought up in a very patriarchal type of family. My grandfather was misogynist. My uncles are misogynists. It's just like, come on, y'all, because it's just a perpetuation of this. This is like status quo. And so it's not
Right.
until I decided, okay, I'm going to visualize this so that we can look at it. We can bring it to the light. As I say to friends, it's like you bring these toxic things out of your being, bring them up to the light so they can burn clean.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it certainly is powerful. I mean, to see all of the images and the time cards and the story about, when you're living it, you understand it, right?
Yeah.
But for those who are not aware and understand the labor,
Yeah.
of Black women or women in general that is discounted and not valued the same, um, it certainly is a powerful
Yeah.
image to be able to connect around that history. And it's not just history, right? So that's going on today, even
Exactly.
with the pandemic. A lot of women are bearing a lot more responsibility with, children right
Sure.
now, and a lot have had to leave the workforce because of the challenges between schools closing and helping children with their education and other constraints as well.
Right.
In addition to household labor, right? The division of household labor is not equitably arranged within homes, which is another element and another burden that goes unseen
Right. Right.
in our lives.
Yeah. And it's not a
Yeah.
blanket
So
element. The majority, I think in the majority of our American society, women are doing the housework usually, right? And let's even look at if you have maids, there's the majority of those workers are women, right? So,
our women.
right, nannies, same kind of piece. People not being valued for this labor that they are putting forth.
Right.
And as I said, I've said in
Well,
my
and
talks, it's like it's not like my grandmother stayed at home and ate bonbons all day. The house was always immaculately clean.
mm-hmm,
Food
mm-hmm.
was always, dinner was
Well,
always cooked. Food was always on the table.
and I was thinking about this this week in relation to civil rights and history and who we uplift and highlight in terms of our historical past, and recognizing that even though I think there are definitely men who are worthy of being talked about in terms of the work that they've done for the
Yeah.
collective, that often the work of women who have been involved in that work are left and rendered
Yep.
invisible and
Yep.
voiceless, right? And so the work of trying to uncover, and even children,
Sure.
so thinking about the lives of children and how they lived in the historical past is
Absolutely.
often also not talked
Yeah.
about. So I want to kind of make a transition and talk a little bit about um, this upcoming exhibit
Mm-hmm.
that you have with the Sedalia Center.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you would talk a little bit about that. You are looking for artists for an upcoming exhibit to take place on Juneteenth.
Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead and let you go ahead and talk a little bit more about that.
Okay. So yeah, the Sedalia Center is located in Big Island, Virginia, for those who don't know, and it's in the northern part of Bedford County. Basically, it's on the border of Amherst County. And the Sedalia Center has a history as the Counter Ridge School, which was the African American segregated school in Bedford County during the late 50s and early 60s. And so, credit to the Sedalia Center, what they want to do is go harken back to that heritage. And they are in the process of doing a history project, which consists of several things. And one of those things is an exhibit of African American and African diaspora artists. And so I put a call out for looking for artists to do. I want to do a visual artist, actually more than visual art, but an exhibit of artists, Black artists and Black and artists of African descent. And so the call has gone out. We've had very little response. So I'm hoping, Leslie, thank you so much for this opportunity. Hopefully that more people will be interested in it. And I'm looking for artists who either live in or have a connection to or have lived in the counties that surround Bedford, which are Amherst, Campbell, Pittsylvania, Franklin, Roanoke, Botetourt, and Rockridge, and the city of Lynchburg. So if you work in any medium, we would love to have you to be part of this exhibit. And as Leslie said, it opens Juneteenth of this year, which is June 19th is a Saturday, 2021. And hopefully vaccinations will go better with COVID and that life will come more normal, because I don't think we'll ever get to the normal for a while, but at least maybe we can gather and have a celebration.
I'm hoping so. I'm cautiously optimistic about where we're headed. So we'll see. Veronica, is there a cost to being involved with the exhibit?
No.
So is there an entry fee?
There's no entry fee.
So there's no entry fee.
No entry fee.
Okay. And if someone wants to contact or get in contact with you, how would they do that?
Well, they can contact me through my email. And actually, if you pull up that final slide, it has that information on it.
Okay. I'll get to that just 1 second. So I wonder also about, can they contact the Sedalia Center if they want to do that as well? Okay, so they can get to the Sedalia Center. All right, let me get to the last slide here. You're making me work.
Sorry, dear.
Let's see. Dear. No, that's fine. You're fine. Let's see.
And so while she's doing that, my email is veronica@jacksondesignGroup.com. And the Sedalia Center's website address is
there we go.
Yeah, sedaliacenter.org. And that's SEALIA.
All right. And so that means if you know someone,
yes,
it doesn't necessarily have to be you. If you know someone who is a visual artist or in some realm of that, right, and who might want to be involved, please contact Veronica or the Sedalia Center to let them know about it. And so what if someone wants you to come and do a talk for their class or for their organization? Are you open to that kind of possibility as well, Veronica?
Absolutely. And in this day and age, since we're still in COVID and we're still doing Zoom meetings, I don't have to be in Bedford to do so. So contact me. My email address is there. My phone number is there. Contact me if you want to have me come and speak to your class or to your organization, and we can definitely do it via Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, please contact her. I think that Veronica, how long have you been back in the area?
I came back
in this area. How long have you? 2017.
Yes.
Yeah, I just, your knowledge and expertise, I think is a treasure for our region and our area. And so please get in contact with her. I think she has a lot of knowledge and information to share with you, and paid work too is also good. I got you, Veronica. Right. I got you.
Well, this is the whole piece about, like, even now, artists are still having issues of getting paid, right? And the profession has advanced so much from when I was a kid, but still artists are not valued. So it's like, yeah, let's value the labor that people are bringing to the table, and their knowledge and their expertise and their experience. That's the other thing. Experience matters.
Okay. Yes, it certainly does. I wonder if you have any lasting words or advice for folks out there who are interested in, visual art or kind of inspiration that you can share with our audience.
Inspiration. Just be true to who you are. And don't belittle and think that you don't have a story to tell. So, and art comes in many forms. It may not be visual. Maybe it's poetry that you do. It is writing, it's spoken word, it is of course voice and theater, but even with visual art, you don't have to necessarily draw really well. There are different ways, different mediums in art. There's collage, there's photography. So don't discount yourself is what I would say. For me, it's this piece is about like self-esteem, self-worth, believing in oneself is so very important, especially as people of color in this day and age right now, because we're still being attacked.
Yeah, that's good advice. Knowing yourself first. Or, I mean, I think it also sounds like the process of doing the work is revelatory about, identity. But yeah, so even in the process of understanding who you are and being true to yourself, the process also helps us grow in certain ways, right?
Absolutely. And then also getting out as much as you can within the confines of like COVID, right? So if you can't physically go out, you can go out online, right? And explore and look at, there's so many artists' websites or galleries and museums that now you can access because of COVID, that before when you had to travel there, it cost a fortune to get there and then a fortune to get in. Like this MoMA right now, Museum of Modern Art, is $25 a ticket. That's not accessible for a lot of people. The Met has gone up on their prices. So now a lot of their programs have come online. So I would say explore what's out there available for you. If you're interested in visual culture and visual arts, explore the entities, the institutions that exist for free.
Absolutely. I mean, art has certainly helped me get through some of the stressful days with the pandemic.
Sure.
So I appreciate the arts and our local art
Exactly.
museums as well.
Yeah.
So
And you can start looking.
All right. Yeah. So I want to thank you for your time and sharing with us. And maybe at some point you can come back. Maybe we can do a collective on some interviews that I have coming up.
Sure.
I have actually one artist coming up who has his work that is sold in a national online store. He's pretty popular. So, we can talk about some possibilities and collaboration.
Okay.
If you're open to that.
Always.
I want to thank everyone for tuning in. And I hope that you continue to stay safe out there and taking care of each other and wearing your mask and social distancing and all that good stuff. I'm looking forward to our show on Monday. We will have Sean Perryman, who is a candidate for Virginia Lieutenant Governor. He's going to join me for a conversation on people, power, and politics. So it should be an interesting discussion. So hopefully you will join us then. But until then, take care and be good to yourself and everyone else around you.
Thanks, Leslie.
All right. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.